Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to share one of the latest pieces of the puzzle that I have acquired. I got a intake manifold today for the Ford 300 that's going in my E150 full cargo that I will be racing at the No Name Nationals in 2024. This is an Offenhauser Dual Port 4-barrel intake manifold. I was originally going to get a Type C, but I found this one on Marketplace for just about a 60% discount of what they are new. The dual port is more of a, they call it a dual plane, but really there's not really a dual plane intake for a 300. The reason they call it a dual plane is actually the way that they have you mount the carburetor. The primaries go here, and they actually run through, I believe it's a longer runner, and as you can see, it's actually split port. That's obviously why it's called split port. And I believe the primaries actually come through this small runner here, and then when the secondaries are open, they come through the larger runners on top and this larger open plenum. So in theory, it will give you good response and torque and economy, but wide open, it gives you the same performance as a Type C, allegedly. But for my level of engine, this will be more than enough. They rate these engines at whatever they rate them at. They'll say 115 horsepower. Like the core engine I have is a 1981, so they're rated roughly for 115 horsepower. They typically don't make that on a dyno. If you actually see these things on dynos, they typically make between 85 and 90 horsepower on a good day. So I am shooting for an engine that makes in the neighborhood of, well, basically I want it to make numbers like a factory 8793 5-liter HO does, which I think is doable because 4.9, 5.0, pretty close in size. So if this engine can make between 225 and 230 horsepower, it will be very good, especially if it's making 300 to 300 or like 320 to 330 foot-pounds of torque below 2200 RPM, because torque's what gets these big heavy vehicles moving. Torque's what'll make it 60 foot really well and do pretty good in the eighth of a mile. My V8 Astro, that engine on the dyno through exhaust manifolds only made 231 horsepower, and 275 foot-pounds of torque at peak was 3700 RPM was for peak torque. So that thing was a total stone. And after the V8 swap, it weighed roughly 4,200 pounds, me in it and a full tank of gas. This new van weighs 4,420 pounds with a full-size spare in it, all 240 pounds of me, and a full tank of gas. So weight-wise, they're not that far apart. If I build an engine for this thing that makes, roughly 320 to 330 foot-pounds of torque, and right off idle it's making at least 280 to 300 foot-pounds of torque, that thing's going to 60 foot the living crap out of that poor Astro. So, but this is what I bought, got a good deal on it. So I have done some measurements. It will fit a van. The body is getting pretty close here, but it will fit. I think I will start running into issues if I run a Holley. I'm going to try to run a Holley carburetor on it. If I run a Holley, I'm going to do a 600 CFM vacuum secondary. If I'm forced to run an Edelbrock, I'm going to do a just standard Performer 600 CFM. But I'd prefer to run a Holley just because it's, a smaller engine, and I would prefer to have a actual vacuum secondary that I can tune. Because with a vacuum secondary, within reason, I'm not saying go out and put a vacuum secondary 850 on everything you own, but within reason, a vacuum secondary, when tuned correctly, it makes it literally impossible to overcarburate an engine. I'd rather this thing have a little much than not enough, though, on carburetor, because the biggest issue at Ford 300s is the intake restriction. Even the EFI manifold's not that great. The one-barrel manifold's terrible. The EFI engine made 150 horsepower, allegedly, but they probably don't make that on a dyno. That's probably just numbers that Ford printed. And then the one-barrel engines can make anywhere between 101 and 115. They were rated in the late 60s at 170, which was gross, not SAE net. So that's probably 120, 130 horse engine on a good day, maybe. So This intake manifold ought to work out pretty good with the cam I've chosen. The cam, everybody says, well, it's a little small. Yes, it is. It's 204 duration at 50 thousandths. It's still 448 lift, intake and exhaust, which is a fair amount of lift, but the duration's fairly conservative, and it's on a 112 LSA. It's a Schneider 256H grind that I'm having Delta camshaft grind for me on, actually the original core that came out of the 300 that's in my 80 E100 now. I stuck with that because I'm more concerned with this engine making its power literally from idle on up to 3,800 to 4,000 RPM. Because that's where it matters. The stock bottom end in these engines isn't good for anything over 5,000. 4,500 is about as tight as I really want to twist one without it being balanced and having a bunch of other stuff. So 4,500 is about max. I'd prefer just to shift it at 4,000. So I'd rather this thing, even if it only makes 225 to 230 horsepower, I'd like it to make really good torque, have a just flat plateau-like torque peak, and just let torque do the work for it. My goal with this engine in this van is to keep a factory torque converter on the C6 and to keep it a 308 gear, so this thing is a total cream puff to drive to No Name and back. But the fastest time the V8 Astra ever ran was an 11:14 at 63. If I build this engine and put it in this van and it runs an 11:13, mission accomplished. If this thing runs at 1099, I am going to be ecstatic, and I think it genuinely can be done. I'm talking to a few different people with stuff on the cylinder head. The cylinder head's going to get ported and a lot of bulwark, stuff like that. The short block's pretty much going to just be a basic rebuilt short block with some hyper-eutectics in it. And I'm going to use split EFI exhaust manifolds, 2 1/4 inch duals. But I really think that this is going to be good, and I'm also wanting to bring something interesting to No Name, something that people kind of enjoy looking at. I saw a few 6-cylinders last year, but, still, in drag racing, V8s kind of dominate. So I'd like to be out there representing the Ford 306 because I didn't really see any. I know there's one guy that's got one with an LS hat on it, but I'd like to be the one guy out there with a traditional inline 6 built the old school way. Nothing wrong with doing it the modern way, but it's kind of cool when you go to an event and everything's there represented, and there's something for everybody. So hopefully this would be a good conversation piece. It's going to sound cool. To me, a 1099 in a cargo van with an inline 6 in the 8th would be a very impressive time. I find that to be more impressive than a 432 small block Camaro in the 9s in the quarter, because we all know it can do that. I just like making things that shouldn't go fast, because it's interesting and it's fun. And when your expectations are really, really low, when it does something, it's a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to this a lot more than I was with the Astro, because at heart, I really am a Ford guy. And I actually cut my teeth on 6-cylinders. I started with Chrysler slant 6s and stuff like that. So inline 6s are something that I've always liked and I've always thought were neat. So stay tuned, and I'll be doing some videos on the engine-related stuff. As y'all saw in my community post, I mailed the camshaft off to Delta to be ground. I'll be talking about that. But stay tuned, and you will be seeing some engine videos coming your way. Y'all have a good weekend. See ya.